What do I care? I got 1,000,000 of them. 1,000,000.
Good. I guess I'm lucky you work for me.
I feel bad for you.
I don't think about you at all.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Ethan here, and today I'm going to show you how to create a retro, mid-century modern inspired clock from start to finish in Blender. I'll be sharing lots of tips and tricks, so if you're new to modeling or new to Blender altogether, this is the video for you. Alright, let's go. So I just opened Blender and I have a new project file here. I'll start things off by first turning on screencast keys so you can all see what I'm doing, and then I will delete the cube and the light. I can do that by selecting them and then hitting X on the keyboard. Next, I'll go to my camera here in the scene collection, and I'm going to click this icon here right next to the camera. This will hide the camera in my scene, which is perfect because we don't really need it while we're modeling. Next, I'll hit Shift A on my keyboard, and then I'll add a mesh cylinder to my scene. I'll go ahead and scale that down a good bit and then zoom into it. Okay, perfect. So one thing that's awesome about Blender is that we can use the number pad on our keyboard to enable different views of whatever we have in our scene. For example, if I hit 1 on the number pad, it jumps to a front view of my scene. If I hit 3, it jumps to a side view. Hitting 7 brings you to a top view like you see here, and so on. It's important to get familiar with these different viewpoints, especially when you're modeling. For now, I'll hit 1 on my number pad to go back to the front view of this cylinder. And now I want to rescale this mesh so it's closer to the shape of a clock. One thing I can do is hit S on my keyboard, which will allow me to play with the scale of the object. But you can see it's really not getting any closer to the shape that we want. So if I hit S and then I hit Z on the keyboard, that allows me to adjust the scale, but only along the Z axis. I can do this type of rescaling along any axis. I can show you really quick what it would look like if I hit S and then hit X, for example. We would be scaling this object along the X axis, just like you see here. I'll undo those changes and return to the front view of the cylinder, and I'll just take a second here to scale it along the Z axis like before, and perfect. That is looking a lot more like a clock. The next thing we can take care of is this boxy look that the cylinder has currently. I want all of these edges to be nice and smooth. So one thing I can do is use a modifier. If you've never used a modifier in Blender, it's sort of like using an effect in Photoshop or Illustrator, if you're familiar with those programs. But anyways, if I go into the modifier tab and click New, there is a modifier here that says Subdivision Surface. This is a modifier that is used all the time in modeling to smooth surfaces, and we're going to use it on our cylinder here. However, if I click on Subdivision Surface, you'll see we kind of get the opposite of what we wanted. It turned our cylinder into this weird clamshell type shape, and that's because this modifier only works if our mesh has a more equal distribution of faces. To show you what I mean, I'll go ahead and delete that modifier for now, and then I'll hit Tab on my keyboard. You see, Blender has different working modes, and since the beginning of this tutorial, we have been working in what's called Object mode. When I hit Tab just now, we entered what's called Edit mode, and in Edit mode, we can actually edit the individual faces of our cylinder. So like I said a second ago, our goal is to get an even distribution of faces on this mesh. I'm going to start by selecting this tool here, which is called the Loop Cut tool. And this tool does pretty much what you would think. It's going to allow me to add cuts to these faces on the side of my cylinder, and that cut will loop around the object. So if I left click, that will actually make the cut like you see here. If I left click and then drag my mouse, you can see I can pretty much manually place the loop cut on my object. I usually like to have one cut going down the center and then at least one additional cut on each side that's nice and close to the edge like this. Okay, perfect. The side of our cylinder is looking a lot better, but you can see the top and bottom is still just one giant face. If I select both faces and then hit I on my keyboard, that will allow me to inset the face like you see here. Again, we want an even distribution of faces, so I'll hit I and then inset the edge just a bit. I'll then hit I again, and I'll just keep insetting the faces this way and working my way closer to the center. Excellent. So now that I've reworked the mesh and I'm happy with it, I'll hit Tab, which will bring us back into object mode. Now, if I make sure my cylinder is selected and then go back to the modifiers tab here, I'll go to where it says subdivision surface and click on it. Now you can see we're getting a much better result. However, you can still see some of the edges. To fix this, I'll go up to where it says object, and then I'll click this line down here that says shade smooth. So now with our settings correct and a more even distribution of faces on our mesh, the subdivision surface modifier is giving us a cylinder with really nice smooth edges. The last thing that I can do is go back to my subdivision surface settings here in the modifier tab, and then here where it says render, I'll actually change that from 2 to 3. Excellent. In my example, we have the face of the clock, but that shape is sort of sitting inside of an additional cylinder. So to create this, I'll select the cylinder, and then I'll hit Shift D on my keyboard to duplicate. Now, just like before, if I hit Z right after duplicating the object, so I'll do that and I'll move my duplicate up just a bit along the Z axis, and then I'll hide it, just like I hid the camera at the beginning. Okay, cool. Now basically, I want to make some more adjustments to this cylinder here, so I will hit Tab on my keyboard, which will bring us back into edit mode. I'll hit Alt-A on my keyboard, which will make sure that nothing in my scene is selected. Then I'll hit 7 on my number pad to enter top view. And right now, I basically want to select this entire top face. There are lots of ways to select faces in Blender. For right now, I'm going to hit C on my keyboard, and this will let me select faces with the circle that pops up on the screen after I hit C. So I'll left click to select the faces that I want, and then right click to exit out of that selection mode. If you make a mistake, you can just undo by hitting Control Z. Great, so now I have what is basically the top face of the cylinder selected. I left one loop of faces on the outer edge unselected, and you'll see why in just 1 second. If I now hit E on the keyboard, that will let me extrude these faces up or down. And that is exactly what I want. I want to extrude these faces down to create that lip around the edge of the cylinder. Just like before, I'll hit Z after hitting E, and that will let me easily extrude along the Z axis. Okay, so that's looking great. I'll go ahead and hit Tab to return to object mode. Back in object mode, I can unhide the duplicate cylinder we created a minute ago, and I'll just rescale and reposition it like this, so it's sitting inside this other cylinder, and there you have it. These two shapes are going to be the base of our clock, and at this point, let's go ahead and add some really basic materials to bring some color into the scene. The first thing I'll do is up here in the top right corner, I'm going to switch from solid mode to materials mode. So this button here, if you hover, it says material preview. Excellent. I'll also go into the render properties tab on the right, and I'm going to change the render engine from EV to cycles. All right, and now to start adding materials, let's go into the materials properties tab down here. I'll go ahead and select the outer cylinder shape, and then in the materials tab on the right, I will press the button that says new, and where it says base color, I'll click on that white box, which will bring up a color wheel, and then I'll just select a color I think looks nice. Let's go with a nice orange like from the example. That looks pretty good. I'll select the inner cylinder shape and follow the same process. I'll hit new in this tab here, but this time I want a nice off-white color, maybe something like this here. Okay, cool. The base of our clock is looking really nice. Let's keep going. The next thing I'm going to tackle are these long, skinny arms that attach the outer sphere shapes to the clock. I'll start by hitting Shift-A on my keyboard, and just like before, I'll add a new cylinder object to my scene. I'll hit 3 on my number pad to view the cylinder from the side, and now I actually want to rotate the cylinder so it's sitting on its side. I can rotate objects by simply hitting R on the keyboard like you see here, but if I hit R and then 90 on the number pad, that will actually rotate the object 90 degrees. So that looks good. Now the cylinder is on its side. I'll hit S on my keyboard and scale it way down. I'm shooting for the size from the example, so I'm going to make the cylinder pretty small. Okay, great. Once the cylinder is scaled down like this, I'll reposition it so it's sitting on the outer edge of this clock shape here. So I'm happy with the scale and the position of the cylinder, but I wanted to extend outward a lot more. I can do this by hitting Tab and going back into edit mode. If I hit the period key on my number pad, that will zoom into whatever I have selected, and since this new cylinder is selected, it zooms in super close, which is great. I'll hit Alt-A to deselect the cylinder, and then I'll go in here and select just this outer face. When you're in edit mode, you can actually select faces, edges, or individual vertices, and you switch between those selection modes up here. But anyways, face select mode is perfect for right now, and again, I'm going to select this outer face of the cylinder. I can zoom out a bit and then use this green arrow here to just pull this face forward along the y-axis, which will extend the cylinder. In fact, if I hit 7 on my number pad and go into top view, this will probably give me a better idea for placement, and I think that's looking pretty good just like that. I'm done editing the cylinder, so I'll hit Tab and go back into object mode. Now, this arm is looking good, but obviously we don't want just one. We actually want 12 arms spaced evenly around these two center shapes we created earlier. So here's how I like to do this. I'm going to start by using another modifier, so I will make sure the skinny arm mesh here is selected, and then I will go into my modifiers tab, click on Add New Modifier, and then select Mirror. As you can probably guess, the mirror modifier works by mirroring objects in your scene. It's an awesome modifier to use while modeling because you can duplicate elements of your design and space them out evenly, which makes things look really nice and professional. Okay, so I added the modifier, but so far nothing has really changed, and that's because I have to change some of these settings over here really quick. I'll go into the modifier tab, and first I have to assign a mirror object. For me, I'll go ahead and click on the eyedropper icon and then select this center cylinder. Next, if I switch the mirror axis from X to Y, you'll see that arm shape is now mirroring on the opposite side of the clock, which is perfect. Next, I'll click on this down arrow and I'll click on Apply to apply that modifier. This basically means that the two arms are now joined into one shape. If I click on one of these arrows and drag it around here, you can see what I mean. I'll hit Ctrl-Z to undo that, and then I'll hit 7 on my number pad to go back into top view. So now I have two arms, one at the top and one at the bottom, and basically now all I have to do is duplicate that shape and then rotate it. However, if I hit Shift-D to duplicate and then hit R to rotate, you'll see that we have a problem. And that is that the shape's origin point is right here along the edge of the clock. You can see the origin point visualized by that small yellow dot right there. We want to rotate from the center of these two shapes here though, basically right where our 3D cursor is in the center of our scene. To do this, I'll make sure I have this shape selected, which is the mirrored arms we just created a second ago, and then I'll go up here to Object, and then Set Origin, and then finally Origin to Geometry. And just like that, you can see the origin point jumped to the center, and now if I hit R to rotate, the arms rotate perfectly around the edge of the clock. So I'll hit Shift-D to duplicate the shape, and now I'm going to rotate it, but like earlier, I'm going to type in a number right after I hit R, and that number will tell Blender how many degrees I want that shape rotated. For example, if I hit Shift-D to duplicate, and then R, and then 90 on the number pad, you will get something that looks like this. I'll go back to our original arm shape that's running up and down through the clock, and make sure that's selected. Now I'll hit Shift-D to duplicate, and then R, and then 30 on the number pad, which will rotate that duplicate 30 degrees. things are starting to take shape here, so I'll do the same process one more time, but this time after hitting R, I'll hit 60 to rotate that duplicate 60 degrees. One very cool thing about this rotation technique that we're using is that it also works with negative numbers. So if I select our original arm shape right here again, duplicate it, and then hit -30 on the number pad, I can rotate that duplicate in the opposite direction like you're seeing here. So I'll do that process one final time and rotate the duplicate -60 degrees to get something that looks like this. Perfect. All right, at this point, I feel like we're on a roll, so let's add those outer sphere shapes you saw in the example. To add these spheres, we're going to use the same exact technique of first placing a sphere onto one of these arms, then mirroring it and joining those two shapes together, and then finally rotating duplicates of that shape around the clock. I'll exit out of top view for a second, and I'll hit Shift-A to add an icosphere. I'll go ahead and scale it down until it's about the correct size, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and place it right on the top arm here. And once it's placed, I obviously want to smooth over these edges, so I'll start by going up to Object and then select Shade Smooth from this drop-down menu. Next, I'll go into my Modifiers tab, and just like before, I'm going to use the Subdivision Surface modifier. I'll increase that render number from 2 to 3 for the modifier, and that should be good to go. I'll zoom out and go back into top view, and I'm going to speed through this part because, like I said, it's the exact same idea as the arms that we just built out. I'm going to select this arm here, and then I will hold down Shift and continue to select the arms just like this until they're all selected. Once they're all selected, I'll hit Control-J on my keyboard, and this will join all those shapes together into one object. Excellent, and just like before, I can go ahead and just give these arms a basic material. This time, let's go for black. And also, down here where it says metallic, I'm going to click on that input box there and type 0.5. I'm really not trying to go in depth with materials in this video, but that's a really easy way to add some realism to the model, so why not? Now I can move on to the outer sphere shapes we just created and give them some materials as well. I actually want to use this nice orange color we're using for the outside clock shape and apply that same material to some of these shapes. I can copy and paste that material by first selecting this outer clock shape. I'll make sure that I'm in the Materials tab, and then I'll click on this down arrow here, and then I'll click Copy Material. I'll then select this pair of spheres, click New in the Materials tab, then go to that same white down arrow, and then click Paste Materials. I'll go ahead and paste that same material for this pair of spheres as well, and for the rest, I'm just going to pick some colors that I think work nicely together. If you're following along, applying materials is one of those areas of this design where you can be super creative, so don't be afraid to try different stuff here. Okay, so we are getting dangerously close to having our very own clock model. All that's left is creating the hands and also the little centerpiece where the hands actually attach to the clock. To create that centerpiece, I'll hit Shift-A to add a cylinder, and I'll scale it way, way down until it's just a small cylinder sitting in the center of the clock face, just like this. I'll use this blue arrow here to reposition it and bring it up along the Z-axis a little bit, just like so. And now, just like we've done before, I'll hit Tab to enter into edit mode, and then I'll add some loop cuts. I definitely want one close to this edge here. After that, I can select this top face and hit I to inset the face like you see here. And then with this center face still selected, I'll hit E to extrude, and then I'll hit Z because I want to extrude in the direction of that Z axis. After that, I can hit Tab again, which will bring me back into object mode. And nothing new here, I'm going to go up to Object and then select Shade Smooth. And I'll actually zoom out a bit so I can copy and paste the same material that we applied to the arms of the clock. I think that material is going to work really nicely for the centerpiece too. All right, so the last two pieces we have to model are the hands of the clock. So to start that, I'll actually hit Shift A to add, and then I'll just bring in a plane. Just like with the last object that we brought in, I'll scale it way, way down, and then use the blue arrow to drag it upwards in space. Awesome, so at this point, I'll actually copy and paste the same material we're using for the arms of the clock and that centerpiece. This material is going to work well for the hands, and it's also going to help me see what I'm doing here. Okay, cool. So at this point, I can just rescale the plane like we've been doing. I'll hit S and then Y to scale on the Y axis. I can do the same on the X axis, and I'll just keep doing this until I have a shape that I'm happy with. I'll go into top view, and then I'll use the red arrow to drag the plane to the right until the left end of it is just intersecting with that centerpiece. Great, that is definitely looking like a clock hand. In my example, I have an additional circle shape that's sort of sitting on top of each hand. A really easy way to do this is just select this inner cylinder shape we made earlier, hit Shift D to duplicate it, and then hit Z to move the duplicate up in Z space. We obviously want to scale it down, and then we can go into top view to help place the cylinder. I'm going to go ahead and place it close to the edge like you see here. Then I'll zoom in and just play with the position a bit. I like the idea that the hand would sort of intersect that cylinder, so I'll use the blue arrow to reposition it just like you're seeing here. Okay, so I'll zoom out and I'll copy and paste the orange color material we've been using throughout this design, and I'll go ahead and apply it to this cylinder. Lastly, I'll select both the hand and that small cylinder accent shape, and then I'll hit Ctrl J on my keyboard, like before, which will join these two objects together into one. Now, obviously, the hands are meant to rotate around the clock, but if I hit R and rotate the hand, you'll see we have that same problem as before. The origin is here, close to the center, and we want it positioned down here, right in the center of the clock. To do this, I'll make sure the hand is selected, and then I'll go up to Object, and then I'll go to Set Origin, and this time I'll select this option here, which says Origin to 3D Cursor. This will move the origin of the hand to the center of the clock like we want, and now if I go into the Object Properties tab here on the right, and I adjust the Z rotation of the hand, you'll see it now actually is moving around like the hand of a clock. To make the second hour hand, repeat the same process we just went through, and look at that. You have a retro clock model ready to spice up any interior scene that you're working on in Blender. This is what the setup for my final render looked like. I used a special spotlight that projects this textured look at the clock. If you're interested in recreating the specific look from this render, I actually have a whole tutorial about how to create those spotlights. The link will be in the description. Thank you so much for watching. If you got something out of the video, please consider liking and subscribing for more content. It really helps me out a lot. And yeah, that's it. Take care. I'll see you in the next one.